At my son's birthday party, my toxic in-laws stood up and claimed he wasn't my husband's child. They held up a fake DNA test and smirked. I could have screamed. I didn't. Instead, I stayed calm, pulled out the real test I had taken weeks ago, and exposed the truth. Not to destroy them, just to protect my son. My name is Nina Calderon, and this is the story of how I almost lost everything, my dignity, my son, and the version of myself I thought was strong, at a birthday party that was supposed to be about joy. My son, Micah, had just turned 5. He loves astronauts and dinosaurs and insists he'll be the first paleontologist in space. His heart is the brightest part of my life. And that day, I wanted everything to be perfect. I planned it for weeks, a backyard party with paper planets, a moon bounce, astronaut cupcakes, and goodie bags shaped like rocket ships. My husband, Tyler, and I had been married for 7 years. Our relationship wasn't a fairy tale, but I believed we were solid. Or maybe I had trained myself to believe that. There were signs, distance in his eyes, long silences during dinner, the way he started sleeping with his phone under his pillow. I chalked it up to stress. Work. Fatigue. Parenthood. I didn't want to think too hard about the cracks. But the truth started long before the party. It started with Linda, Tyler's mother. From the moment I met her, she had something to say about everything, my hair, my job, the way I spoke Spanish to Micah. "Don't confuse him," she said once. "He lives in America." I smiled politely, as I always did. Because she was his mother. Because I believed if I showed enough patience, she'd see how much I loved her son. How much I cared about our family. That never happened. When Micah was born, Linda's interest in me dropped entirely. She was obsessed with him, but not in the way grandmothers usually are. She was territorial. Possessive. She'd show up unannounced, criticize how I fed him, what clothes he wore. "He doesn't look like Tyler," she'd mutter. "Are you sure he's his?" At first, I laughed it off. Babies change. He had Tyler's chin, my nose, and his own personality. But her words grew sharper as Micah got older. Once, when he was 2, she told me to my face, "You're lucky Tyler hasn't asked for a test." I told Tyler. He shrugged. "She's being dramatic," he said. "Don't take it seriously." But I did. Because even if he wasn't serious, she was. And still, I tried. I kept inviting her to birthdays, to holidays, to Sunday dinners. I told myself family meant patience. That it wasn't my place to create more conflict. I believed that if I just stayed calm, one day she would see me for who I really was, a woman who loved her family and deserved to be in it. Then came Micah's 5th birthday. The yard was full of color. Laughter. Children running with capes and galaxy helmets. Parents chatting, cups of lemonade sweating in their hands. I had just set out the cake when Linda stood up near the folding tables and tapped her fork against a glass. The sound cut through everything. She was smiling. That tight, triumphant smile that always meant she was about to say something she thought was profound. "I have something important to share," she announced. "We did a DNA test on Micah." My stomach clenched. I couldn't move. "And," she continued, holding up a folded paper, "he's not Tyler's son." The yard fell silent. Every head turned. I felt every pair of eyes on me, on Micah, who stood frozen near the balloon arch. His little face was confused, his fingers clutching the edges of his space-themed t-shirt. I turned to Tyler. He didn't say a word. Just crossed his arms, and smirked. Something inside me collapsed. Not because I believed her. But because the man I married was letting this happen. I don't remember dropping the paper plate in my hand, but I remember the sound it made when it hit the grass. I remember Micah's cape fluttering in the breeze and the quiet crackle of the nearby speaker still playing a faint loop of "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star." I remember the weight of that moment settling over me like a lead blanket. But most of all, I remember Tyler's face. That smirk, so casual, so detached, like this wasn't our child, like this wasn't our life. And Linda? She looked triumphant, like she had just solved a riddle no one asked her to. I walked over slowly, my legs moving without permission. People stepped back, the way they do when they think they're about to witness something explosive. But I wasn't angry yet. I was numb. Linda held out the folded paper like it was a golden ticket. "We had suspicions," she said, her voice syrupy. "It's for the best that everyone knows now." I took the paper from her and unfolded it with trembling hands. It looked official enough, black text, lab headers, the words "paternity not established" bolded near the top. But I kept scanning. Something felt off. And then I saw it. Tiny font at the bottom. Almost unnoticeable. This test was conducted using an over-the-counter at-home DNA kit. Results are not admissible in legal proceedings. It hit me all at once. They swabbed Micah without my permission. Without even telling me. They had the audacity to test my child behind my back, to twist an unreliable result into public humiliation, and Tyler stood there like a spectator. I turned to him. "You knew?" He didn't flinch. I had doubts. "That's our son," I whispered. "You let your mother accuse me of lying, of cheating, on his birthday." His eyes flicked away. You never made me feel sure." I blinked. "Sure of what?" He didn't answer. Because there was no answer that would have made sense. No answer that would have justified doing this in front of our son. I looked out at the guests, parents from Micah's school, friends from work, neighbors we barely knew. No one said anything. No one intervened. They all just watched. I could feel the pressure building behind my eyes, the scream forming at the base of my throat, but I didn't let it out. Instead, I folded the paper and handed it back to Linda. "This," I said softly, "isn't real. It's not valid. It's not even accurate." She frowned. "It's enough for us." I turned to the crowd, forcing myself to speak clearly. "They used a store-bought kit. One that isn't admissible in any court. They did it behind my back. And they think that gives them the right to humiliate me, and my child, on a day that was supposed to be about love." I heard someone gasp. A woman near the snack table murmured, "Are you serious?" I looked back at Tyler. "Do you understand what you've done to him?" Tyler's arms dropped from his chest. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the moment had finally started to crush him. I wanted to be sure. And instead of asking, I said, "You chose shame." Micah was still standing off to the side, unsure, scared. I went to him, knelt, and pulled him close. His small arms wrapped around my neck like he was afraid I'd disappear. I kissed the top of his head and whispered, "You're mine. Always." When I stood again, I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just looked at Linda and Tyler and said the only thing I could. "You don't get to hurt him just because you're hurting." And then I walked into the house. Not because I was giving up. But because some battles aren't fought with screaming. Some battles are won by refusing to become what they expect you to be. I shut the back door behind me and leaned against it for a long time, just breathing. The sound of the party, if you could still call it that, was muffled now. No more laughter. No more music. Just a low hum of discomfort, like tension hanging in the air. Micah had followed me inside. He clutched a cupcake in one hand, the frosting squished into his palm, forgotten. "Mommy," he said, voice soft, "why did Grandma say I'm not Daddy's?" I knelt in front of him. My first instinct was to lie. To make it easier. To protect him from something he shouldn't have ever had to hear. But I didn't. Because if I wanted to rebuild what had just been broken, it had to start with truth. "She was wrong," I said gently. And sometimes when grown-ups are hurt or angry, they say things that aren't true. He blinked up at me. "Did I do something bad?" My heart shattered. "No, baby. You did nothing wrong. You are the best part of my life. And no matter what anyone says, you are mine. Always. He nodded slowly, then climbed into my lap. We sat there for a while, on the kitchen floor, his head tucked under my chin, the cupcake melting between us. I didn't move. I didn't wipe the tears that had started running down my cheeks. I just held him, trying to be steady, trying to give him something solid to hold on to in the mess we'd both been thrown into. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Eventually, I heard footsteps approaching, the slow, uncertain kind. Tyler. Nina? His voice was low, like he already knew he'd lost the right to say my name out loud. I didn't respond. Just stroked Micah's hair, still curled in my lap. Tyler stepped into the kitchen, his hands shoved into his pockets like a teenager caught sneaking in late. I didn't think it would go like that, he said. I thought. I don't know what I thought. You thought humiliating me might make you feel better, I said, still not looking at him. Or maybe you thought if I broke down, you'd finally have a reason to leave. He didn't deny it. I wasn't trying to hurt Micah, he said. But you did, I said, finally meeting his eyes. And you let your mother use him like a pawn in her power game. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. Don't. Just, don't. There was a long pause. I don't think I love you anymore, he said quietly. It should have stung. Maybe it did. But in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit for a long time. I know, I said. And I think you've known that for a while. He nodded. I think I stayed because it was easier. I looked down at Micah, whose breathing had slowed, his little fingers curled into the fabric of my shirt. You should go, I said. Tyler shifted. Are we? We're not going to fight, I said firmly. Not in front of him. Not today. He hesitated, then turned and walked back out the way he came. When the front door finally closed behind him, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Later that night, after I had cleaned up the half-eaten cake, the scattered goodie bags, and the untouched presents, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were the real DNA results, legally verified, professionally processed. I had ordered them weeks ago. Not because I had doubts, but because something in my gut told me I'd need them. I stared at the words, probability of paternity, 99.99%. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired. Because this wasn't about being right anymore. It was about healing what had been broken. And maybe, just maybe, choosing not to break it further. The days after the party were quiet in the kind of way that makes you notice how loud your own thoughts are. Tyler didn't come home that night. He didn't call either. I found out through a mutual friend 2 days later that he was staying at a hotel near his office. Linda didn't reach out at all. Not even to see Micah. I thought I'd feel angry. I thought I'd stew in it, clench my fists, fantasize about courtroom showdowns and righteous speeches that would leave them speechless. But instead, I felt hollow. Micah, on the other hand, bounced back faster than I did. Kids are like that. Resilient, even when the adults around them forget how to be. The day after the party, he came into the kitchen dragging his cape behind him, looked me square in the eyes and asked, "Do I still get to eat leftover cupcakes for breakfast?" I laughed. A real laugh. And I told him, "You get to. But don't tell your dentist." And just like that, we began again. I consulted a lawyer the following week. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed clarity. Protection. Boundaries. I explained everything, even brought the real DNA results. She read through them slowly, looked at me with kind eyes, and said, "You have every right to fight for full custody." But I didn't want a war. I wanted peace. I told her I wasn't here to destroy Tyler. I just wanted Micah to have safety and stability. She nodded and said, "Then we'll start with mediation." It was during those meetings, quiet, gray conference rooms, legal pads between us, that I began to see Tyler clearly for the first time in years. Not the man I had married. Not the boy Linda raised. But the human being behind all the disappointment, the fear, the pride. He looked exhausted. Older. Smaller. Not cruel, just lost. He never once denied that what happened was wrong. He apologized, not the defensive kind, but the real kind. The kind that comes from someone who's beginning to understand the damage they've caused. And when he asked if he could still be a part of Micah's life, I said yes. Not because I owed him anything. But because Micah deserved to know his father's love, even if it was fractured, even if it needed time to heal. That was the hardest part. Learning that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing. It didn't mean pretending it never happened. Forgiveness, I was starting to learn, meant choosing not to carry the pain forward like luggage you can never set down. Linda was a different story. I saw her once, 2 weeks after the party, when she showed up at my door without warning. I didn't let her inside. She stood on my porch in a beige coat, her hair pulled too tight, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. "I came to say sorry," she said. I was wrong. I believed her. Or at least, I believed that she believed she was trying. I didn't invite her in. But I thanked her. I told her I wasn't ready to have her around Micah yet, not until she earned that trust back. Her eyes flicked with something between shame and resistance, but she nodded. "I understand," she said, and walked away. That night, I cried in the shower. Not because I was hurt. But because I was healing. Healing is messy. It doesn't come with applause or closure. It just shows up slowly, like sunlight creeping across the floor at dawn. And somewhere in that mess, I realized I was becoming something I hadn't been in a long time. Whole. Not perfect. Not vindicated. But whole. I moved Micah's bed closer to the window that week. He'd always liked falling asleep under the moonlight. There was something about that soft silver glow that seemed to calm him. I watched him most nights as he drifted off, small chest rising and falling, thumb curled under his chin, a picture book still open beside him. And I'd think, this is what I'm holding it all together for. Mornings became our sacred space. Just the two of us, slow breakfast music playing, waffles shaped like stars, juice in mismatched mugs. There were no loud voices, no walking on eggshells, no pretending to be okay when I wasn't. There was just honesty, and quiet comfort. Tyler started seeing Micah on weekends, Saturdays only, for now. I was cautious at first. Protective. But Tyler showed up. He brought books instead of toys. He asked questions instead of making excuses. And when Micah hugged him goodbye the first weekend and said, "Daddy, I had fun," I saw something in Tyler's eyes break open. Maybe regret. Maybe something deeper. The court granted me primary custody, but not full. My lawyer called it a win, but I didn't see it as winning or losing anymore. Just navigating. And if this was a map, then all I wanted was for Micah to never feel lost between us. One day, while cleaning out the garage, I found a box labeled wedding keepsakes. It had our vows, dried flowers from my bouquet, a photo strip from the booth we'd rented for the reception. I sat on the cold concrete floor and went through every piece, quietly, carefully. I didn't cry. Because that version of me, the hopeful bride, the woman who thought love could cure anything, she wasn't gone. She had just grown. She'd learned that love isn't just holding on. Sometimes it's letting go with grace. And sometimes it's knowing when to set down the weight you've been carrying, not because you're weak, but because it's time. I donated the dress. Gave away the centerpiece jars to a young couple down the block planning their wedding. And I kept only one thing, a picture of Tyler holding baby Micah in the hospital room. His face in that photo, raw and scared and overcome with wonder, was real. I needed to remember that there had been truth once, even if it didn't last. A month after the party, Linda asked to meet for coffee. I said yes. She looked older. Not in the way time does to you, but in the way regret does. We sat in the corner of a quiet cafe, stirring drinks we didn't really sip. She apologized again. But this time, she didn't try to explain. She just owned it. I thought I was protecting Tyler, she said. But really, I was trying to control something that wasn't mine to touch. I nodded. Mike is not a trophy. He's not proof of anything. He's a person. Her eyes welled up. I know. I do now. We talked for a while, about how fear can twist love into something unrecognizable, how generational trauma doesn't excuse behavior but explains how it forms. She asked, cautiously, if she could be part of Micah's life again. I told her, not yet. She didn't argue. But before we left, she said, when you're ready, I'll be here. That night, as I tucked Micah into bed, he asked, Mommy, is Daddy your best friend? I paused. Not anymore, I said softly. But he's someone I used to love. And now, we're learning how to be kind again. Micah thought about that, then nodded. I think kindness is better than best friends. I kissed his forehead. Me too, baby. And in that moment, I realized, this wasn't the life I planned. But maybe it was the one I needed. 6 months later, the house felt lighter. Not because I'd redecorated, though I had, a little. New curtains. Brighter walls. I let Micah pick a galaxy print comforter for his bed and hang glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. He called it mission control. But the lightness wasn't in the things. It was in the air. In the way the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. In the way I could breathe without bracing. I had taken a leave from work after everything happened, but I eventually returned, part-time at first, then full. My boss had been gracious, my colleagues kind. People had whispered, I knew that. But they'd also watched me show up. They saw me keep going. And I think, somewhere deep down, I started seeing it too, that I wasn't just surviving. I was evolving. Micah was thriving. He started kindergarten in the fall, and every day he'd come home with stories about Ms. Patel, his best friend Mason, and a class hamster named Buttons who escaped once and caused total classroom panic. He laughed more. Slept better. The shadows that lingered after the birthday party slowly faded into the edges of memory. Tyler and I weren't friends, not really. But we were something civil. He never missed a pickup. He sent books for Micah's reading logs. He asked about dentist appointments and Halloween costumes. Sometimes we talked for 5 minutes at drop-off. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. But he tried. And I respected that. Linda wrote Micah a letter every month. Sometimes she included a small toy or a storybook. I read each one before giving it to him. At first, I held back. I wasn't ready. But Micah started asking questions. Why doesn't Grandma visit anymore? Did I do something wrong? And I realized something important. My forgiveness wasn't just about me. It was about him. So I called Linda and told her she could come by. Supervised. Slowly. She cried. I didn't. But I understood her tears in a way I hadn't before, not as guilt alone, but as the breaking down of old armor. That first visit was awkward. Micah was shy. She was careful. But it happened. And the world didn't collapse. One Saturday afternoon, while Micah napped on the couch beside me, I opened my journal and flipped through pages filled with grief, rage, love, questions. I found the entry I'd written the night after the party. It was raw and jagged. Full of pain. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again, I had written. And yet, here I was. Safe. Not because nothing bad could happen, but because I had rebuilt trust in myself. I made tea. Sat on the porch. The sun was dipping below the rooftops. The air smelled like new leaves and faraway barbecue smoke. My phone buzzed, a message from a new friend I'd met through a single mom support group. Still on for brunch tomorrow? I smiled and typed back, absolutely. Can't wait. And just like that, I felt it, the soft hum of life moving forward. I used to think strength meant standing tall, shouting loud, showing people they couldn't hurt me. But now I know. Real strength is quieter. It's walking away when you could stay and fight. It's choosing peace when chaos is the easier option. It's saying, "You don't get to break me," without raising your voice. It's holding a child who was almost used as a weapon and choosing, instead, to turn him into a bridge. I watched the sun disappear behind the hills and whispered to no one, "Thank you." Not to Tyler. Not to Linda. But to the version of me who stayed when it was hard. Who didn't become cruel just because she'd been betrayed. Who gave love the dignity of ending without vengeance. Micah stirred beside me, blinking up with sleep-heavy eyes. "Mommy, is it still today?" I kissed his head. Just for a little while. And in that moment, I wasn't Nina the betrayed wife, or Nina the angry daughter-in-law. I was just Nina. Mother. Whole. Free.